Three, two, one. Henry Palmer, you are one of my favorite people in the whole wide world. Thank you for talking to me today. How are you doing?
Yeah, oh, that's really nice of you to say. Thank you, brother. I'm blessed. How are you? What's new?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Just chilling. I'll try not to. I'm not going to get into the politics of mask wearing, but I entered a shop today, and we'll leave it at that. But but yeah, man. I think why I say you're one of my favorite people in the whole wide world is because I love people who have an ability to be lighthearted and humorous while also being, pretty deep on certain subjects, man. And you've got like an amazing ability to speak on really important topics of our age, man. And it's just lovely to see you.
Well, you're a great facilitator of these conversations, so
Thank you,
pleasure.
bro. Thank you. Right, Marxism, go.
Marxism, well, I suppose growing up myself, white working class, not a political family and certainly not a socialist family. Marx was never really introduced in any way. And I suppose the first time I ever came across anything remotely Marxist, if you like, is if it was a film by Peter Joseph, who was a political utopic filmmaker. And in the film, it spoke about effectively corruption of oligarchies and monopolies and all these sorts of ideas. So the first time I was really exposed to this was about like 17 or 18. And, with my mate, Mary Jane. And we were, and my brother and others were watching it. Anyway, so at the end, I don't know if you know my mate.
Is this a short film or something? It feels like a script.
Oh, what, the Peter Joseph film?
No. Just the way you're like setting it up sounds like you're really creating the story world here.
Yeah. Well, it was the first time that these really big ideas, about the banking system and the flaws of capitalism were really exposed to me and put and articulated in a very digestible way. And at the end, he proposed this alternative vision of society, which was this society which was based on altruism and volunteering. He may have spoken about full automation. So, in other words, some of the ideas that Marx was talking about in Capital, my Marxist immersion, my understanding of Marx is quite sporadic, to be honest with you. So I wouldn't say I'm an exhaustive, I don't know Marxist theory exhaustively, but what I do know, I've borrowed to help me understand society. So, for example, reading the Economist book, Paul Mason's Post-Capitalism, he speaks about Marxist views on full automation. He wrote a book called A Tangent on the Machines, I think towards the end of his life, which effectively countered everything that he traditionally had written about machines and technological advancement that is undermining the human, like in as you saw in like Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times in 1936, this dehumanizing theft of jobs from people appropriated by machines. But Tangent on Machines went against that, and he said effectively that machines can emancipate people. So I really like that Marxist idea, and I think about it often. Mum's ringing, it's not time. I suppose when I hear some of the most famous slogans of Marxism, workers of the world unite, I sort of think that appeals to me because I think about my mum working basically for 15, 20, if not longer years in the retail sector for a really poor wage in the sort of like late 90s, 2000s, stagnant wage, and the sort of feeling of hopelessness that we had in the house, this feeling of you have to accept that. So that, so yeah, I would just say that my understanding of Marx, and the reason I like Marx, is the emphasis on egalitarianism, on I think also on collectivism, and that shift away from individuality, and individualism that we've had trending now for the last 40 years. I remember when I was an Uber driver, I was giving this doctor a trip, and we were just talking like late at night. I picked him up at some posh shindig in Clifton or whatever, but really nice, like, you know, like doctors who got loads of money, but they live in a posh area, but they're very humble, if that makes sense. And he said, what did he say now? Oh crikey, why did that even come up? It was really relevant. It was really good. You would have been like, whoa, man. Yeah, I can't remember it. It'll come back maybe.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot there with Marxism, and it's a very, very complex topic, and yeah. And it's funny you mentioned the Peter Joseph film, because you're talking about the Zeitgeist movie, right?
Yes, yeah.
And that for me as well was a big turning point. And I think for a lot of my friends, like, that was like a mad viral film. For anyone who doesn't know, came out, I want to say like 2010, around that time or something, maybe earlier. And it was, yeah, it's just fascinating. It was just a really nice, in 3 movies, a really nice critique of modern day society, and actually proposing a really interesting alternative by suggesting actually that, yeah, machines and automation might be able to relieve humans of some of the labor enslavement that we kind of see in the world today, right?
I'm going to show you some, in a bit, I'll show you something to do with that in a minute. But yes, exactly. And you saw it as well. Yeah, it was incredible, right? And like, I think one of the reasons I don't have this, I've never really felt it necessary to get this exhaustive understanding and of Marxist theory, is because it's disconnected in a lot of ways from, I think, the eras of the proletariat, of the working class, of just the general consumer, especially in Britain. So, I mean, you know, the basic evolution of society that he speaks about from, I don't actually know, I can't remember if he speaks about hunter-gatherers or not. I think he certainly talks about the agricultural revolution as, in a way which is sort of analogous with modern day anthropologists, being the birth of corruption, right? Where you suddenly had these chieftains. It was the birth, 13,000 years ago or so. You suddenly had, with the agricultural revolution, surplus with the leaders. And so egalitarian societies was no longer necessary, and hierarchy formed as a result. Feudalism followed, right? So renting the lands from the aristocrats, and then the mercantile capitalist revolution in the sort of, well, I only just read, actually, apparently it was in the 1200s in Britain. I thought it was a lot later than that, but that was the first cracks, apparently, or the first sort of transcending, if you can call it that, from feudal society to mercantile capitalist society in the late 1200s. So I'm reading a book right now all about Nazis, the working class, and Marx. It's funny, and we'll probably talk about this later, but it's, you know, I'm sure some people get offended now just seeing like a book on the Nazis in the background on Sky News. You know, they're like, they see a book on the Nazis, like, well, he was researching the enemy, did you see? Or they were. But, you know, anyway, this sort of history of this Marxist history, and then where it goes today, I think there's a lot of disconnects in terms of, one, I suppose the working class are less likely to be knowledgeable when it comes to history, de facto, of their class, and so there's not that sort of same interest there. So I think, I don't know, that's why for me I just like to talk about, I don't know, I try to be quite loose with it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. What is your kind of response to the growing and ever-present critique of Marxism, particularly with things like the Black Lives Matter movement? There's been a lot of right-wing people sort of trying to say that Marxism has infiltrated the movement and stuff. Do you ever, and I know you looked at the podcast I did with Dominique Samuels the other day.
Yeah.
What do you think about the kind of backlash against Marxist thinking?
Well, I think the thing that Black Lives Matter, the organization, as well as the movement, has in common with Marxist thinking is it recognizes how little in control we are. And it goes against that, again, that traditional kind of conservative, individualistic thought. So Black Lives Matter points to 400 years empire in the Caribbean, and it follows that trajectory to the civil rights movement, the Black Panthers in the 80s, to the modern day, and it still sees that disproportionate reality that faces Black Britons, or, I mean, in between that category, between the Caribbean Britons and the African Britons. And that's what Marxist thinking does, is it sees the ripple effects of class conflict, I suppose. So I think that's probably where there's like a join up of thought. But what do I think it's good, or do I like? Do
you think there's a regressive element to leftism, as they're calling it nowadays? And is that tied to this backlash against things like Black Lives Matter? I suppose that's kind of what I'm getting at, is that you got a lot of right-wing commentators like to use Marxism as a reason to attack the left, because Marxism has been somewhat implemented, or communism has been implemented in things like Russia and Maoist China or whatever, and it didn't end up brilliantly. And so whenever there's lefties getting out of control and making a statement, they seem to want to bash it down. But I know we've discussed before, there are definitely problems with the left.
Yeah, there are. I mean, I don't. I suppose I don't. I mean, I suppose, I don't know, for whatever reason, somehow conservatism. Well, it makes sense because conservatism is synonymous with tradition, and tradition has basically been racial inequality and class inequality. So that's probably where that natural backlash comes from. I guess it is what it is. I mean, in terms of looking at it empirically, like, I don't see people, I didn't want to name them, but I don't see these career commentators I just see them as a natural emergence. But I think something that you and me are both really interested in is bridging the divide, bridging the gap. I think we're fed up with arguing in contention, and like, we just don't like that, I think, naturally, as people. So I went down to the Black Lives. No, I did the knee from home, because I felt it was a way to sort of, I don't know, just contribute myself, if you like, to, in solidarity with at least the movement of Black Lives Matter. Because
don't hold back as well. Do speak freely, because I think there is a big difference between the sentiment of Black Lives Matter and the organization of it, if you know what I'm saying.
Well, I feel like I mean, I don't know, but I know I've seen things like this, but I think that the accusation of racism is a very serious one. And when it's used, one needs to be careful not to trivialize the genuine thing. The same with class oppression, like, I've been, not the same, but analogous to, I mean, I've spoken to middle class or like bourgeois type people before. I've been speaking about, I don't know, like, negative looks that have been directed my way because of who I am. And then there's this sort of self-identification, or this, like, I don't know, like, fetishization of my class by these people. And then they speak about it from their own perspectives, and they say, Yeah, no, I mean, like, I have like exactly the same thing, and they tried to like big up their working class credentials. You know, like they ate like a packet of Space Invaders once or something. So, but I went down to I didn't go down to the Black Lives Matter thing, so I didn't. You know, I think the social distancing thing should have been, for me, that was a reason not to go down. And then, but I did weirdly go down a week later to the All Lives Matter one. But I did that because I was curious to research for myself, and find out what these people are like, who are being written off as a bunch of racists and so on. And you know, some of them certainly were, but one thing that the left was unwilling to concede is that everybody who went to the Black Lives Matter protest a week before weren't infallible, holy art thou individuals. For example, one person, and this almost certainly happened, because I've got it from about 3 or 4 sources now. One of the protesters went over to the cenotaph, the World War One, World War Two joint cenotaph, with a graffiti can. And some of the people who were there defending it took the graffiti can off this, I think it was a young lady by all accounts, with a hoodie, and that was that. And then out of that emerged this sort of defend the cenotaph thing, which wasn't entirely affiliated, by the way, with All Lives Matter. One of the head organizers on it, again, this would be news to some people on the left, if you like, or, you know, the sort of regressive left, if you like. One of the main organizers of the All Lives Matter protest is a chief in an African village. I won't like detail it, but it's like, that would be quite big news because of all the altruism and the money that he gives and so on. Anyway, so yeah, there were you know, racists there, and obviously you're more likely to find them there. But there was this one chap, and he got up on a bench, and he started off, and he would think he was drunk, but he said, right, World War II, yeah, blacks, whites, Indians, we all came together, you know, and to fight the Nazis. And I was like, yeah, sounds good. But these leftists, and I won't say what he said, and I was like, oh, that's a shame. But he walked past, and then I said, like, I really like, you know, what you were saying there, except for the leftist bit. He was like, yeah, that's fine, mate, that's fine, because you're far left, aren't you? And I was like, yeah. And anyway, we had a bit of a discussion, and he spoke about unity. Like, he spoke about unity, you know, the virtue of unity. And that, for me, showed that he's human. He's not somebody who is irredeemable. So if only we could try and be less judgmental and be more interested in building the bridges, I think that would be really conducive to everyone.
Absolutely, man. People are often just, I feel like when people say, the leftists, they're just repeating what they've heard other people say as well. In the same way that, you know, us on the left might, you know, talk about the right-wing people, you know, in a generic way. You've talked about a spiritual socialism, and you've talked about the need for important moral values within everything. And I feel like there's a little bit of moral superiority performed by the left sometimes. What do we do about that?
Well, but here's the thing, right, is that leftists, Marxists, communists, socialists, whatever you want to say, generally renounce religion, and spirituality is not really there. It's very misplaced. So I personally take a lot of comfort and solace in thinking virtuously, or thinking about how one can be ethical through virtues. Marx is known for saying that religion is the opium of the world, in that it distracts and it sedates. But he also said there's a heart in a heartless world. And he said that it's the sigh of the oppressed. And, you know, without, you saw this, I was speaking about this in another lecture, so I don't want to bore you, but I I've been involved in two communities the last 3-4 years in Bristol. 4 years. The Baha'i community, which is an Iranian religion that came out of Iran in the mid 1800s. Abrahamic, follows Judaism, Christianity, Islam, but also encompasses Buddhism, Hinduism, and so on, and is therefore a lot more pluralistic, which is really nice. And there's a lot of emphasis in the community that I see on virtues. They don't talk badly behind other people's backs, which is like the most foreign mode of conduct to most people in society, I think. They practice that Jesus dictum of, before you judge the speck of dust in somebody else's eye, remove the plank from your own. All encompassed by the different virtues that you can think of: courage, generosity, honesty, you name it. So there's that. And then in the leftist community, which I've also been involved in, which I love my comrades, and I use that word unequivocally, because for me it denotes a person who is pro-egalitarian, anti-corporation, anti-injustice in the workplace, pro-union. There's nevertheless, I think, there's more vicious conduct ubiquitous in that community for whatever reason. So I think a reconciliation between Marxism as traditionally thought and spirituality, virtuous Aristotelian thinking, whatever you want to call it, could be really, really beneficial. Because it just is de facto good to be good. Like, but that's the irony, is that you speak about being holy art thou type thing. Well, they can't be, because they don't even try to generally pursue virtuous conduct. Like, for example, the minute like they say, like, a leftist who knows a lot about Marxism puts their nose up at somebody else and will write somebody off as a racist, they're lacking the empathy of empathy, the virtue of empathy, the virtue of understanding, of generosity, and so on. Like, it's really boring, but try to be like Jesus as much as possible, I think. Like, that's so boring, I think, but actually it's not boring. And Jesus said that the gates to hell are wide and many pass through them, and those to heaven are narrow and only a few make it through, and therefore it's supposed to be difficult and so on. But
it's one of the issues, though. Everyone thinks they're the good guy.
Yeah.
Capitalists think they're the good guys.
But I think sometimes, I don't know, have you ever met somebody who's so good that they make you feel bad?
Yeah, you.
Oh, shut up, man. Don't be daft. But I mean, I remember, I'm trying to think of an example, is I remember I came back from uni, and it was first year, and I was in Bristol just going about, and I remember giving to this homeless person, and the way I was speaking, though, was this sort of patronizing way, this sort of piteous way, and my friend said to me, just speak to them like they're human. And so that made me feel bad. Just his conduct of just treating all humans equally made me feel bad for not doing that. So similarly, I think one could lead by example, ideally. Like, I think.
But we all know, come on, but Henry, we all know that, we all want to strive to be good, right? I mean, that's conservatives want to be good people, left-wing people want to be good people, far-right people, probably think they're good people. I guess it's a matter of, it comes down to a philosophy of whether you think humans are inherently bad or inherently good, or somewhere in the middle, right? And I know that at the core of conservatism is this kind of idea that humans are a bit crazy and we're a little bit dangerous and we're kind of bad, so we need to be ruled over by these powerful elites who will make sure we're safe. And the Rousseau and the left just kind of think the opposite, and they're a bit more idealistic and think, no, humans are all right, leave us to our own devices and we'll treat each other well.
Yeah, I think well that's the irony, I think, on the right, if you like, is that there is this belief that effectively nature is red in tooth and claw. It is a sort of neo Darwinist, social Darwinist type thinking, but then there's also then this interpretation of this movement economically, politically, of no, leave them to it, which is so there's a great confliction there. I think the reason I think the left is more wise on this subject, it seems to, the idea of collectivism and the idea that humans aren't inherently selfish seems to make more sense when you look at our hunter-gatherer roots. I was reading a book called Affluence Without Abundance by Dr. James Sussman, which looks at about 100, 150,000 member tribes, not 1,000, 150 in Namibia, the Kwanzi tribe they're called. That tut, he specified in the book how to do it, and it was like tut when disappointed, like as in that sense. So it's Kwanzi tribe, like in Namibia, just north of South Africa, I think, to the west. But he speaks about that them as effectively being an illustration of how humans evolve for the majority of our evolution. Small tribes, males hunt meat, females gather nuts and fruit. By the way, not getting an alt from an is here, but just on the emphasis on the collectivist point. These great sort of ego checkers. The male would come back with a big carcass of meat, and they actually have this tradition of it. They call it insulting the meat to keep the male's ego in check. So they'd be passing around the meat, and they'd just be like, "Oh," not in a Bristolian accent.
You sure?
They'd be like, "Yeah, no, they don't sound like me."
Okay.
And they'd just be like, "Oh, this is a bit rubbish, isn't it?" And that, like, they all go around in the circle doing that, and it's not malicious. It's just to keep his ego in check. That's illustrated again when a anthropologist tried to gift them in the 70s a big cow, and they said no. And when they were asked why, they said because that would go to his head, that would make a man go crazy, make a man kill somebody. So this again relates, so fast forward like 50,000 years or whatever to the agricultural revolution 13,000 years ago. It relates to Marxist thinking, and that it was the birth of, and this is what modern anthropologists say, it's the birth of corruption, the birth of inequality, because you suddenly had these monopolies at the top where the retention of great fields of plant and growth could be harvested and kept for oneself, and therefore you had to curry favor, and you had to like be a footman. And so it's a modern phenomenon in inequality and in individualism and hierarchy. And like, for example, if you ask the Kwanzi tribe, take me to your leader, they won't know what you're talking about. You're never going to let me get away with that tut, are you? She's going to be like,
I love it. How do you keep your own ego in check, Henry? You're a talented comedian. I've seen you. You make people laugh. You're a smart guy. You've got a charm about you. How do you keep your own ego in check?
For me, I get a lot of ego sobering from my involvement in the Baha'i community. Although I'm not Baha'i, I'm Baha'i curious, as they say. That's what they say. I'm not saying that. I'm not being disrespectful. Every Wednesday I throw a devotional, which is like a 40-minute place for prayers and poems and peaceful music, and it definitely keeps me grounded. Alexandria Cortez, AOC in America, the famous sort of new wave of American socialists, she speaks about it in how she stays humble and focused in terms of, she says she tries to bear witness, which is, I think, similar in that sense of just saying, accepting that there's something higher than you. It's not about absolving yourself of responsibility, but it's just about recognizing how infinitesimally small you are. Not looking at yourself too much in the mirror. Tricky.
Do you like AOC?
Yeah, I only saw recently the film that really, you know, pushed her out into the main limelight, the Knock Down the House, recently on Netflix. So it talks about this modern socialist American movement. There's an equivalent of her in Virginia, who, it turns out, by the way, Virginia is where the name redneck originally comes from, and it's not like ancestral related, or it might be a little bit, but the apparently the main origins of it were the West Virginia miners who fought back, black and white, against the mine owners. I think it was the 1920s, and they wore red bandanas.
I thought it was a sunburn thing, that, you know,
and I think it's a bit of that as well. Yeah,
bit of a mix.
Yeah, where the bandana didn't stretch.
I see.
What about you? How do you stay humble?
I don't. No, I meditate. I do flirt with spirituality quite a lot. Like, I love.
Flirt. That's good.
Well, it's difficult, man. If you're raised secular, you know, you're raised without God or whatever. It's hard to really engage with it on a deep and serious level. But I like the idea of a higher power. I think that the words and opinions of thousands of people before me shouldn't be discredited because science proves that there's no man in the sky. I think, yeah, man, I don't know. It's difficult, man. It's difficult. I think everyone's got to find their own way. But I think the reason I bring that up is because, of course, ego is a big part of the issues in the world, and I do wonder if power actually just corrupts. You know, it's not a saying for no reason that power corrupts absolutely. So you do just have to wonder whether, and it's beautiful what you're saying about those tribes. Like, I read that in a book as well. It was referenced in Humankind: A Hopeful History by Rutger Bregman, and he outlines that stuff as well. And there is a real interesting discussion to be had about hunter-gatherers, and I quite fancy being one, the way it's written about that, the original affluent society. But I think we also have to account for the fact that society's changed, man. Like, for whatever reason, hierarchies have emerged. You know, the agricultural revolution did happen. You know, it's like, I think some leftists or whatever can get a bit too romantic about this idea of going back to, like, you know, hunter-gatherer communities. Not quite as extreme as that, but I do think there's got to be a level of reckoning with the fact that capitalism is here. It's not brilliant. It does breed inequality. Humans are a bit crazy. Let's work with what we've got and see what we can do, mate.
I mean, yeah, I think, you know, putting the names capitalist or socialist to one side, which I know you like to do as well. I mean, I think one of the ways forward really is, because we know exact egalitarianism is impossible and not even, you know, to be aspired towards. And so is gross inequality. You know, the psychological impacts. There's a great book called The Spirit Level, how you might have heard of, how equality is better for everyone. You know, and there's this great analysis on the psychological impacts of feeling like you're the subordinate. You know, you see this analogous, again, not without being a romantic leftist, but you do see it with our closest cousins, the chimpanzees. The most subordinate chimp is depressed, is self-harming, is ill, has a lower life expectancy. You see this in Bristol City Council. Like, they come up with a deprivation report. You can compare empirically Westbury-on-Trim up here, the most privileged, prosperous area, with Lawrence Hill right at the bottom, and everything is lower or higher. Sorry, everything is more negative, deleterious in Lawrence Hill. The mortality rate is worse. the amount of income, the the mental health, the being addicted to substances, everything is worse. So that's not preferable, and you see a disparity there, and you see that as, you know, partly nature, partly nurture, significantly to do with our condition, and I think significantly nurture, and that's another reason I steer more to the left, because I think it is a counter to this individualistic nature argument, which has been sort of dominating the last 40 years. So yeah, true. But one of the things I do like the idea of is our relative policies, the idea of like a relative income between a CEO and the most lowly of employees, where it's fixed to something. The same with the ownership of property. The same with these relative ideas. I really like the idea of economically in politics, because they seem to necessarily disallow gross inequality. You know, if you grow, everyone else has to grow.
The last time you were on, actually, we talked about universal basic income. And I think this pandemic has probably shown its value to a large degree, man. What are you showing me, bro? Where are you taking me?
You ever seen the Jetsons?
What the fuck is that?
Am I a champagne socialist now?
What is that? AI?
Exactly. This is the beginning of the emancipation of humankind. Oh, where's it gone? So it's a automated vacuum.
That's mad.
I'll turn it off because it goes on a bit. But it's actually not too loud. It's really effective. And it gets lots of dust up. But imagine that, right? So, okay, now that saved, you know, humans how many hours, how many days of their life, right? Think about the advent of the washing machine in the 50s, 60s, and how that emancipated and women and gave them more time. Now think about the Tesla network of Elon Musk. Imagine a nationalized version of that, where you have a system. You have a system of automated cars. You no longer have taxi drivers, and you no longer have lorry drivers, and you no longer have delivery drivers. And apply that to as many places in society as you can think of, and then ask yourself the question: do we find new jobs for these people to do? Because humans got to work. Keeping in mind, by the way, the Kwanzi tribe working week is like 13, 15 hours. Or do you say, okay, should we just have a universal basic income? Should we try to make it in society so that the bare necessities are provided for all people: food, water, travel, so on, and everything else can be somehow collaborated, thought about differently? I'm a fan of the latter camp. I really am. I think it's patronizing and insulting to our species for it to be assumed that we need to be given things to do. You know, like, it's, why do you put the toy in the toddler's cot or baby's cot? I don't know, I'm not a dad yet, I don't know about these things. To keep them distracted, to keep them busy and entertained, yeah? We don't need to be treated like toddlers or children, babies, which, by the way, is the argument that the right make against the left, you know, of authoritarianism.
Just think, just think how much PlayStation and Xbox you could play with all that free time.
No, don't say that. You're going to put them off. You mean how innovative we could be, and how much more time we would have to create even more beautiful things and be entrepreneurial, because we're no longer scared about taking the risk. Yeah. There's evidence for this. Some of the greatest scientists of all time were those with the most amount of time on their hands. Like the man to first measure the weight of the earth was an aristocrat. And why? Because I can't remember his name. I think it was in Britain, and I'm pretty sure it was the 1600s or so. But he just had all this time on his hands, because he was an aristocrat. Like, he had his estate, and he had the people working the land, so on. And he obviously had this amazing education. So recreation was for him academia, and he found a way to measure the earth. So
yeah, no, bro, I'm playing with you. Leisure time is important. You talk about the hunter-gatherers. Hunter-gatherers didn't wake up with a 9 to 5, like, right, I need to commute into the central tree line, and pop my headphones in on the way there to keep me sane, and then come home
yeah,
come home for tea with this big old fucking gazelle we've got, and then insult the meat. Yeah, so it's like, I definitely think leisure time is important, but I do think you have to acknowledge the transition period to that, to just remove. I mean, actually, this pandemic has shown in a lot of ways that removing work has positive benefits for some people. They enjoy it or whatever. But undoubtedly, you got to account for people in, like, parents living with 5, 6 kids or whatever in small apartments and stuff. It's like, leisure time is great for the aristocrats, right? It's great for the wealthy in society. I mean, like, we just have to account for the transition period, and it's not like, right, lorry driver, that's it, pack it in, go start coding and learn how to make computers. It's like, there has to be some kind of way of assisting people through that process.
transition training. I mean, I've spoken to people who have been really psychologically negatively impacted by COVID-19, because for them, I think they've been institutionalized. They know nothing else but work. You have to work. So transition training, yeah, in a, like, slightly, yeah, and for that gap between where we're at and full automation, where people are taught that they don't need to work. What would that even look like? They would need to, I don't know, just stare at themselves in the mirror and say, "You're a really neat guy," or like, just look at each other, and I don't know what that looked like. Yeah.
No, it's difficult, man. I think one of the bravest things you have to do with it is accept and embrace the boredom. I know for me personally, I'm not saying that everyone has to be a creative and do whatever, but my ideas often come from prolonged periods of boredom. It's like, if you actually don't fight the boredom and do it, try exhaustively to distract yourself with whatever it is, and you just sit with yourself and you relax and you, I don't know, read or just do something else, it might, you never know. It's exciting, right? It's like, where might it lead you, man? It could lead you anywhere. It could lead you to a variety of things. But yeah,
but you need those tools though initially, right? And like you say, aristocrats had that. The fact is, it's like Ben the brickie, or Eliza the electrician.
Ben the brickie.
But like, the fact is that I remember having this chat with my mate before. I was deliberating on whether I wanted to go back to this parking cars at Bristol Airport job, because it just sucked. It was horrible. In the rain, you'd go in between all the cars, right? You pulled cars and you take them back to park them for prolonged periods. It was raining, you get really wet. It was really hot. You get into these hot cars. The pay was really bad. There were a bunch of OAP jaded workers there who just didn't care about society. And then you had a lot of Eastern Europeans there who hated the idea of unionizing, because they didn't have this, they weren't coming from a place with the same union movement that we've had in Britain. And they also had this, like, necessarily anti-Soviet, anti-socialist, in other words, view. So I was just there by myself, just like, should we ask for some more pay? And they're just like, either no, you're lazy, which I also hadn't when I was trying to do it with Uber, or naive, mate. But I was deliberating on whether I wanted to go back to that job. My mate, he was a plumber. So this is anecdotal, but he said, job's a job, you got to work. Like, that is the scariest idea for me, is this, this idea that you have to work as a balance, of course, you have got to exert yourself a bit. And I'm not being classist or anything like that, but, the fact is, tradespeople generally, I think probably, they're less likely to have an academic education. And maybe on that basis, they're less likely to, arguably, I don't know, read certain types of books or even books in general.
But things are still going to need building, Henry, isn't it? Like, this is the thing, this idea that suddenly we don't need, like, robots. It's going to take a while before robots can delicately build houses and sort out plumbing, right? So there's no need to worry, I think, immediately. Let's not get ahead of ourselves here.
Yeah, well, that's it. And yeah, sorry.
What's the craziest, couple last questions for you. What's the craziest experience you had as an Uber driver, and how much are you missing stand-up comedy?
The craziest, oh my days. All right, let me think about that. Okay, one of the craziest Uber journeys I ever had was being invited back to this sort of middle class party in Bedminster. A lot of Londoners new to the city in their early 30s. They really enjoyed my company. They said, "Oh, you got to come back with us." I said, "No, well, I got to hit my target." They said, "Well, how much is your target?" I said, £20. And so this guy chucked me a £20 note. I went to Asda, got some brandy and Coca-Cola, went back, and also, yeah, I was single at the time, and this lady kept on speaking about how she loved me. She was really like, "I love you," and like looking into my eyes, and I was like, okay. Got to the party. Turned out she had a boyfriend. Fine, cool. But then there was this like disconnect. Nobody else really wanted to talk to me, and it was really weird. And I know I'm like an unusual character in that, but there was definitely something a bit off here, like this conspiracy or something. I don't know if it's the way I sounded, or like my cologne, or the way I walked, or all of it. And then it got to the point where we were all sort of sat upstairs, almost like this around in this like circle, like a Ouija board type thing. But we were just chilling, and no, I remember with the landlady, that's it. I was at the top of the stairs and she was like showing me around. And this guy just ran up the stairs. He said, whatever her name was, "Lily?" Like that or something. And he came like, "Lily, are you okay?" But he's looking at me like I'm really suspicious. And I'm just like, and he's like, and she was like, yeah, I'm just showing him around. And he was like, "Okay, but if you've got any problems, you let me know." and he went back downstairs, and I was just like, okay, like, he thinks I'm a thug or something. And then she's like showing me around, fine. And then later on, we're like sat around this circle. Somebody said something insulting to me, and I took the bait a little bit. And then she got up. She just said, "I think you should go." And I was like, "What?" She was like, "Yes, I've heard you've made some people feel very uncomfortable now, a few different people. So I think you should go." And I was just like, and I got up and I gave this like this mini speech. I just thought, I'm going anyway, so I'll be a bit theatric. And I said, "Okay, I'll go. But at least one of you here right now knows the injustice which is taking place at this time. You know that this is not just, and that this is some sort of concern." And I spoke in this like theologian type way, and I said, "I will not meet your expectations of the thug that you think I am." And I just left. Weird. That was weird.
All right.
Do I miss stand up? Yeah, I do, but I'm happy to just be jocular in person every day rather than going out my way to come up with a fix set.
And lastly, mate, when are you running for Prime Minister? Because rumour has it that you have entered politics.
Yeah, so I'm standing as councillor for Hotwells and Harbourside in the May election next year. Oh dear, he said. And I mean, I'm. It's nice. That's another talk, I think.
But good on you, man. Like, boy, do we need some more young people in politics right now.
Thanks, brother. Thank you, and thanks for doing what you do as well. You're you're a great facilitator of these conversations. Easy to talk to. You're a good person, man.
Only God is good, brother.
Only God is good, brother.
Are we going to end this with some kind of spiritual reckoning here?
There's a nice bit of scripture I was reminded of recently. It's John 21. And Jesus was, they were down, I think it was the Sea of Galilee or the Black Sea, I can't remember which now. But he said, all right, chaps, no, I won't even do it like that. He said, how's the fishing been? And the fishermen who would become disciples said, nothing. And Jesus said, cast out your nets to the right side and ye will find. So what I take from that, and the reason I like that, is that as long as you try and do the good thing and you try and be a good person and you put in the work, then it will be found.
I like that. Thank you, Henry. Henry Palmer, the Messiah. There's
It says Elias. Elias is like the most biblical name, isn't it? Like, it's an Old Testament.
Yeah. It's Elijah. But
okay.
Man, no, the Bible's great. There's some great quotes in it, actually, the New Testament, and I've looked at, you know, some quotes and some of the parables, and they're actually really great, you know, guidance, you know. You don't have to take it all so literally and start a cult, but it's, you know, there's some good stuff in there.
Yeah, or be like, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Big ups, Henry. Always a pleasure talking to you, man. Stay safe, stay strong, and God bless.
God bless, brother.